Hi, everyone. My name is Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for joining us for a live Q&A with Amy Seimetz today, who is the writer and director of She Dies Tomorrow. Before we get started, for those of you who are with us in the Zoom, I just want to let you know about the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen that you can use to submit questions to Amy, and we'll try to jump into a couple of those towards the end of the conversation. So have a think and feel free to throw things in any time as they pop into your head as we're chatting. You'll also see a chat box where you can all chat and interact with each other as we have our conversation. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce and welcome Amy Seimetz. Hi. So I want to dive into talking about the film because I'm obsessed with it and I love it. But before we start talking about that, you were just mentioning that you've been playing weekly mafia with a bunch of other filmmakers during quarantine. And I wanted to ask you about how that came up and what that looks like in your week to week as part of your quarantine.
There's a bunch of people that sort of plan it. So Sophia Takal, who what did she just direct? The Black Christmas, right? Just recently.
Yeah.
And she also made another movie called Always Shine in Green, and she's a great filmmaker. And then Hannah Fidel, Chris Ray, who has a movie out as well, Clea Duvall. I'm outing everyone. Clea Duvall is a nasty player. She is nasty and cutthroat. So is Lindsay Birch, the actress Lindsay Birch. She's also very sneaky. Like I mean, there's been moments during quarantine when we've been playing and it's been so intense that it's almost like friendships are about to end. But what else are you gonna do?
Nowhere to go. Yeah. And then I wanted to dive in by asking you about the genesis of the film and in writing the script, because one of the interesting things is it's such a character-driven piece, but it's also such a thematic-driven piece as well. So I was really curious about which of those two threads were kind of the genesis of this that you built the initial concept off of.
I think it's both. I'm lucky to work with actors who are extremely talented, obviously, Caitlin Shield, Jane Addams, and everyone else in the cast. And I love tone and trying to match performance inside these worlds. And they are so instinctual in the way that they perform, and they're able to sort of transcend logic in their performance and get to these very irrational places. One, because they just like understand me and as a creative, but also most of the people in the cast are my friends in real life. So there's a luxury of having a shorthand in order to do that. So for me, it's like everything that I ask the actors to do. Because I'm an actor myself, I love supporting their performance, and they trust me to go to these very strange places because they know that I'm supporting them with camera work and lights and sound design and all of these things. They all sort of go hand in hand. Not sort of. Movies, all movies do this, but they all interplay with each other, which is like sort of the performance is informed by the tone, and the tone is informed by their performance. It's sort of a reciprocal thing.
Yeah, and I know that you had the idea of having Kate and Jane in those roles very early on. Were they initially attached when you were still working on the script? Because I know that you like to write very specifically for your actors once you cast roles to shape it to their performance abilities and the way that they're going to approach their character.
Yeah, I wrote both for Caitlin Shield and Jane Addams. In the beginning, what I wanted to do, because I write for television and for bigger budget movies, the process, like in the industry, which I do like in some ways, it's just different, is much more rigid. There's like clearly defined like development, writing, then you lock the script, then you shoot, and and then you edit, and then you sound design, and sometimes you have pickups, but it's very linear in a way, and I like that because you have to kind of cut yourself off at a certain point, right? But with this, because I was self-funding it, I really wanted to have the luxury or utilize the fact that we were shooting in these pieces, and utilize the sort of the boundary of shooting these very small with a small crew and and let the shooting inform the script, and the script inform the shoot. Well, obviously the script inform the shooting, but have this relationship where I could shoot for a weekend, edit it, and then, you know, there's a lot of things. Soderbergh and I talk about this a lot, is like, you know, you prepare, but then when you get to set, you have to be really nimble and stay on your toes and acknowledge if something much more interesting is happening on set. And a lot of times it's performance. It's something that the actors give to you, or like a mistake, or a happy mistake that like happens in camera that you realize, and then you're like, that's really interesting, let me write that into the script, which you don't have the luxury of doing when you have this rigidity of a schedule. So that in the beginning, I had these ideas of Kate behaving really strangely in her house, to the point where it becomes alarming. And then I wrote Jane into it, because then I realized where I was going with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And kind of in a similar vein with television working in that way, production wise, is there a way in which it's also kind of taught you to teach kind of almost like fast and dirty in the way that you really have to with independent cinema, because television moves at such an incremental pace every day?
I mean, I think it's both. I mean, it definitely enhanced. I definitely improved in terms of like being extremely efficient and making and racing against the clock. But you're doing that anyways on independent film, and I think television, for me at least, and also for a lot of my friends, that I think it's in a really easy transition for independent filmmakers to go from independent film to television, because you don't have a lot of time, because time is money when you're making an independent film. So you have to be efficient, you have to be selective of your shot design, you have to, you know, make sure that you're getting the story with a specific, you know, with very specific shots, because you don't have the time, you don't have the money, you don't have, you know, the resources to do things. And with television, even though you have a larger budget and a lot of things at your disposal, you still have that you're racing against the clock. So, but at the same time, there's also what my experience has been is that no matter what budget you're working at, it never seems to be enough money. Like, it never seems to be enough time, and it never seems to be enough money. So it all sort of feels the same. Even on Alien, I was overhearing, you know, producers being like, well, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money. And I was like, isn't this like a $150 million movie? I was like, who is spending this money? But at the same time, they spent it really well. I mean, the sets were incredible, you know?
Yeah, and you were mentioning how you actually ended up self-financing this, and I know that you did have a production company that was interested in potentially coming on board early on, but it sounds like their expectations of what they thought the movie was going to be, even just based on the title, was very different to your artistic vision. So was it just something that was very important to you at the core, that you retain that artistic vision and kind of take it off and do it on your own in that way, rather than letting somebody else meddle with it?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I was always looking for, you know, an independent level size budget, right? And the money, no offense to them, because they're doing their jobs, because they have to protect their money. I'm not saying that they were doing a bad thing. They were like literally asking me like, what, you know, what's the story? And I was like, it's gonna be whatever I want. And then, but they also, I knew in general what I wanted the film to be, but they were asking me like, you know, body counts and things like this that it was a genre company. And I was like, and at the time I was like, sure, fine, lots of people die, I don't care, like give me the money. And then after that phone call, I was just like, I don't know, that's just not the film I want to make. And if I were to make that movie, I would ask for a whole lot more money, because it's sort of like, it wouldn't be personal anymore, if that makes sense. It would be one for the studios, you know? So then I was just like, you know what, I'll just take the money I made from Pet Sematary and pay for it, and just pretend like that money didn't exist.
Yeah. And location wise, one of the spaces that you used for the character Amy's home is actually your own home. Was that something that came out of navigating the budget, or was that something where you really just were sitting in this space and saw it as the perfect vision for this character that you were developing and creating?
You mean the perfect character, Amy? I mean, both those decisions were sort of like tied together because there is a lot that's from my own life and from my own personal dealing with personal anxiety. And I mean, honestly, the reason to shoot in my house, or what I found inspiration about shooting in my house, was one, because it was a very meta movie for me. But also for 10 years prior to owning my house, I lived out of a suitcase and was like kind of like a glorified version of being a vagabond in a way, just from set to set to set. And then would sublet in different cities when I was writing, and hadn't had like didn't have like a home I was renting for a long period of time. Didn't own things, just owned what was in my suitcase. And so but when I bought my home, I felt completely undeserved of it because I didn't grow up with money. But I also knew how to be a filmmaker before I knew how to be a homemaker, or I mean, I live alone, homemaker for myself even. And so I got in here, and within a month I was like, we were shooting a movie in here because I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, I don't know what to do with this space. Like, I don't, even if, like, what's funny, I mean, there's a few pieces that I bought, but even when I bought it from the owners, I was like, can you please leave the furniture in there because I own nothing. So there's still like, I just didn't know how to use the space. So I was like, oh, the only way I know how to use spaces is to shoot a movie. So that's why we shot it in here.
What was the process of production designing within your own home and within that space? Was it something where you left a lot of your own pieces around, or did the team really come in and shift what the space was to tell this story?
Well, I would show you over here. Well, that's fine. I just ate. So over here, that's my couch. That is my couch. I did buy that because it reminded me of Florida. And then, whoa, by the way, this painting is by Tunde, who's also in the movie, who's also a lead singer of TV on the Radio, who's also a brilliant painter and also a brilliant animator. Gosh. But anyways, I own two of his pieces. That's pretty much all I bought. And then my friend Jillian Mayer from Miami, she made that. But the space was literally my couch and boxes from me moving in. And I just went with it. It's like, she just moved into the house. I just started picking things from my life. And then because we were shooting in pieces, we'd have to, what I didn't think about was I had an unfinished bedroom in the back where the wallpaper was half done. Because I'm terrible at wallpapering, I found out. And it was half done, but then I shot it in the movie, and then the movie became an excuse to not actually move in. Like, it became my excuse to avoid really being a homemaker in a way. But so I've kept everything sort of like half moved in for a very long time. And so the production designer, Ariel Vida, who came on after a few of the shoots, I had already taken pictures, and she just recreated with the boxes and stuff, because I wasn't just leaving the boxes there while I was living my life. But she came in and she recreated everything that I had already shot. So it was, I did make the movie an excuse to not like move on with it was just empty walls for a very long time. I like procrastinating a lot. I like any excuse to procrastinate. Yeah.
Because you were mentioning a little bit about the need for nimbleness and discovery, and those scenes early on when Caitlin Schill first has that overwhelming sense of I'm going to die tomorrow, and is just really moving around within the space. What was that process of how much you knew about what was going to happen between the lines of dialogue? Because there's so many beautifully crafted quiet moments that are really just about staying with the character versus what you kind of left up to, not chance, but like to discovery within the moment as you were working there with your cast and figuring it out.
Specifically with that period of time, it was you know, again, because of not to keep talking about my house because it's going to get boring, but like it was a lot of me realizing when I was alone in my house and I was trying to feel connected to the space and connected to the house, and I was wondering, should I feel something for this house? Should I like, and I didn't want, and I also, because again, I didn't feel like I deserved a house. I didn't want to take it for granted. So I wanted to like learn every nook and cranny. And so sometimes I'm in California, so this is legal. Sometimes I get stoned and sort of try to like get, touch the walls, and then I'd laugh at myself at how crazy, if somebody were to peek in the window, how crazy that seemed. And Kate understood, because one of the things in all of my films and all of my work that I really like is feeling like you're spying on somebody. And there's something incredibly vulnerable about alone moments that I think I'm still obsessed with, of like, what are people like when they're alone, especially when you're dealing with a story about death, right? Because one of the saddest things to me when you lose somebody on earth, or the people I've lost, is that, I'll always have my memories, but like the thing that breaks my heart the most is I'll never know the moments that made them sort of giggle to themselves, or the weird oddities that they saw that sort of made them sort of question things, or the thoughts that went in their head that they never said out loud. And so with Kate alone, and some of that stuff, that was sort of my interest of, is like what it looks like to be alone, but also being playful with it, and allowing a sense of humor to it. And Kate's just great, because and Jay, I should mention that too. Jay as well, Keitel, the cinematographer. There's, we've all worked together for so long that there is this lovely relationship of exploration, of like, there is a plan. It's very, we know where it's going, but like finding those like interesting moments, whether it's through camera or performance, or the interplay between those two, is always really fun with them, because we just trust each other, and we all know each other, and our sensibilities as well.
Yeah, and I love the way that you managed to capture all of those internalized moments of the film, especially with those interstitial image moments where you're really playing around with light and imagery on screen. And I heard that was part of that was you and Jay, your cinematographer that you were just mentioning, playing around with like plexiglass and liquids and glitter. So I was really, really fascinated by that, and how that came to be as part of what you put on the screen in the end.
Well, and that's again, it's like the thing that I wanted this experience of making the movie to be, not just for myself, because as a filmmaker, let me try to, my brain, as you can tell, I do incomplete sentences all the time. Let me go linear, but it's like, my brain wants to like jump ahead. Very ADD. But so what was interesting to me as a filmmaker, you don't get to do your craft all the time, because it takes so much time to get to the point when you're shooting. And part of it for me was, I was developing things for TV, and it takes forever. And I was sort of going crazy, because I really love directing and creating. And so part of it for me, and that I explained to Jay and to Kate, as far as the exploration, was like, the first thing I said to Jay was like, tell me what lenses, here's the idea, tell me what lenses you want to play around with, right? And so he told me, we looked at the characteristics, he sent me all these like, all these videos of what the lenses look like. And I was like, okay. So we started working from there, and then got really excited about how to shoot what the inside of the body looks like, and then make it look like the universe, And so he showed me these other lenses that were these really extreme macro lenses. And I was like, oh, like it was just this interplay of like, he'd show me a lens, and I'd be like, I bet I can go to Michael's and find this craft store and find glitter and dirt and Rit dye and oil, and like create this like window. At first we were thinking a fish tank, but then I realized a plexiglass, because then we can move underneath this huge piece of plexiglass. So I was just like dumping things onto the plexiglass, and we were like shooting it on this track. And we have like probably like 4, 5, 6 hours of that stuff, because it just was so fun in my garage. Again, it was so fun. I have a garage, like that's amazing. So we used to have like 4 or 5 hours of that stuff. And what was beautiful about it, about experimenting and allowing the film to be this playful space, like almost like you're a kid and you're making potions in a way, that then through that experimentation, we learned how to control those images. So maybe that first 2 hours of footage wasn't necessarily perfect, but we learned how to get those images. And now we're better filmmakers because of allowing ourselves this space to sort of fail and and experiment in a way.
Yeah. When you're on set and you're shooting, obviously at the end of each of the 12+ hour days that comes into production, your day as a filmmaker and as a producer on the film is never over. And I was really interested in what that looks like for you when it's wrapped for a day and everybody goes home. What are the things that you then go home and you're still sitting there thinking about, or you're preparing for the next day, so that when you step onto set first thing, you're ready to make all those decisions that everybody needs from you?
Well, shot design, like making sure, because each day sort of brings, in addition to rewriting pages for something specific like this. Actually, I did that on my show too, because each day brings to light something new and exciting. So you want to make sure that you reflect that, because if you discover something on set and it's not supported by the rest of the film, you can't really, it's not usable in the movie. So if you discover something on set, you go home and you're like, how can I don't want it to come out of nowhere, right? Or like this really amazing thing that they did, and I don't want it to come out of nowhere. So let me think about how to implement that into the movie. So there's several ways of doing that, which is like, discovery through the shot design, discovery through the performance, but discovery even plot wise. So when I go home, it's thinking about the shots, the performances, and then the script, so I can communicate this to everyone the next day. And but there's always some problem that arises. So it's, in addition to that, you're also, I love producing because I love having my hands in it, because I know that it allows me to be creative on set once the problems are solved, as opposed to somebody solving the problems for me. I want to be in that decision, or be a part of that decision. And so there's always something like a location dropped, an actor can't show up, da 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 da. So there's just, there's a lot. Luckily, at first I was editing at night, and then, which left me no sleep, and then I brought on Kate Brokaw, who ended up editing it, and thank God. And at first I was like, well, I just need somebody that won't get like their ego hurt if I send them cuts of the way that I want it to be edited. And she was just so good that I didn't need to do that. And I'm glad that she did that, because otherwise I wouldn't have slept, I don't think. And then, mind you, this is in addition to my actual day job, where I'm in addition to writing for television, I go away and act. And then we also shot this Gucci thing for Natasha Lyonne while we were shooting too. So it was, yeah. So.
And then, because you were mentioning your editor, Kate, I think the post-production on this film is so impressive with the way that you really allow it to sit pacing wise with the characters at certain moments. And then there's other points where like it moves forward a little bit faster and it's kind of jumping around a little bit more when it needs to. So how did the two of you work together collaboratively to figure out what those different pacing points were going to be throughout the film?
Well, initially because I edited probably like the first 30 minutes or so. Obviously there were changes made to it, but once we finished the movie, but I edited the first like 30 minutes, and I really wanted to stick to this meditative quality, because like and I've heard people it's very important. It was very important for me for the very first like 20 or so minutes to feel very, very quiet, very isolated, and very alone, and for you to pay attention to all of these things that she's doing, because otherwise the humor really doesn't work later. Like, it's not a surprise later. And I was using these sort of markers of the way that our traditional sort of narrative markers of like, once it hits the 20-minute mark, now we know what's going on. Now we can start running and we can start getting wild and stuff, right? But with Kate, like, she understood that, and in the editing style, which this is so tacky and boring, but usually you cut on action, and I realized with this movie, it was all about cutting after the action. There was something weird and jolting about, usually when I go to shake your hand, you cut the other person, or like you cut on action, which is everyone knows this. But for this, for some reason it just didn't work. And probably because I was dealing with anxiety and suspense, but also an awkwardness to the film too, that it worked with both, where it was like not cutting right on action actually helped with the tension, because people weren't expecting, you don't expect it to cut there in the subconscious way, but also it's awkward and the movie is silly. The movie has a sense of humor to it. So it worked on both levels. And it was something that I discovered while I was cutting. I was like, it's not as interesting to cut it straight. It just wasn't, yeah.
That's so interesting. I can't wait to rewatch it and look for those moments. And in terms of the way that the characters all respond to someone around them kind of being encompassed by this and having their own personal realization of, I feel like I'm going to die tomorrow, it's so fascinating to watch the different external responses that everyone else around them has. And I was just really curious about the way that you thought about each of these characters, these really, really fleshed out, layered individual people, and how that led into what each person's response was to this very surreal situation.
Sure. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I wasn't really, most movies when they develop characters, they like give you like a resume of what the character is in life before you go on this adventure. And I just wasn't interested in that. I've seen it and get it. I understand how to write that. I do it for TV. I just wanted to see people like making decisions. But like if you just plopped down, you weren't able to ask questions and you just dropped into these people's lives, you wouldn't, and you had only context clues of kind of what they did, or maybe you don't even see them doing what they do. And so I just wanted to see their reaction to, which was the most important question, the reaction to your own mortality. And at that point, it doesn't matter what you do for a living, right? I mean, like we all die, just period. And then just erases everything else. It's like, it doesn't matter where you live, what you do, like, like death and sickness is the great equalizer, right? And so to me, having dealt with death very closely with my father and several friends, and watching like people's reactions to it, everyone has their own way, whether they want to deny it, whether they want to blame somebody, which is what Katie Aselton, who plays Susan, does. She wants to blame Jane. It's all Jane's fault that this is happening. Jane wanting to incessantly talk about it and connect with people. Caitlin Shield, who plays Amy, like wanting to like just sort of like pretend like it's not happening and just sort of wander around and kind of like trip out or space out and do whatever she wants. And then Tunde and Jen Kim, who play Tilly and Brian, they have this realization of like, oh my God, there's so much wasted time. Like we wasted so much time together. Which a boyfriend actually did say that line that Jennifer says to Tunde, which is, I was waiting for your father to die to break up with you. But it wasn't. What the weirdest thing is, like, it sounds so cruel, but it was so honest that I didn't take offense to it. Like, I understood. It was like, this relationship was supposed to end, but I didn't want to break up with you in the middle of your father dying. And I really appreciated it. Like, honestly, I really appreciated the honesty. And he was right. The relationship was over a long time before that. And so it's just like these different reactions of what I've experienced in people facing, death and obviously outside of themselves, but still.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I wanted to jump into a couple of the questions that we got from the audience. This first one being from David, who said, Amy, first of all, I love your style. It's so inspiring for young writers and filmmakers. Considering what's been happening in the world with the pandemic, when you were developing this story and the theme, did you consider it as a type of psychological virus that could also grow into its own pandemic?
I did not think about this literal pandemic when I was making it, because I started making it in 2018. I was again dealing with my own anxiety, and I found that when I would talk about it, it was almost like a contagion. Like either friends would like be concerned about me, or they would start to get paranoid about stuff too that I talk about. In addition to that, aside from the personal I'm a news junkie, and starting from basically leading up to the 2016 elections, I just couldn't stop watching news. And what I noticed and or observed was like every 3 days there was like something that was going to end the world, and every right, left, center, didn't matter. That like, oh my God, it's the end of democracy. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. Oh my God. And then 3 days later, you'd be like, there'd be a new thing that was ending everything. And you'd be like, what happened to this thing? They're like, that's old news. And it's like 3 days later, that's old news. Now we're on to like Scaramucci. And he's like saying, and then he's fired, and, or whatever. There's just like a new thing that was just sort of like, I guess addiction, but also sort of spreading like wildfire. And to me, it was like this contagious form of ideas that like you can laugh at in some way, because a lot of it is this absurdist comedy happening before your eyes, but at the same time, ideas have consequences. And ideas can have beautiful consequences, have beautiful ideas lead to beautiful things, but ideas also lead to really horrific things, obviously. And so for me, like the important part in the movie of the contagious element to sort of solidify it and to show that doesn't matter how it doesn't matter like why it was important to show Craig, who's played by Kentucker Audley, dead through like assumed gun violence, right? Whether that's him shooting himself or Amy in some, in the scuffle shot him because she was scared. It doesn't matter. Ideas have consequences, and there's a consequence. Jane getting stabbed. Their ideas have consequences. It's not necessarily a story about how or why. It's a story about ideas spreading, and that there are consequences. But then what do you do with that, and how do you live your life knowing that?
Yeah.
I don't know where I went.
It's really, really fascinating to uncover all those different layers, because there's so many levels to this film. And then I wanted to just wrap up with this one question from Sarah, who's asking, what do you feel that you learned about yourself as a filmmaker through the process of making this movie?
Let me think. I think what I realized, or maybe a boundary I broke through, was because there was nobody at all to answer to, and there was no pressure to prove myself, at all. Like I didn't feel that way. Maybe other people feel that way, but I didn't, because I was like, I already direct television. I already get to play and be in movies. I sort of need to come up with new goals of career stuff, but like I didn't need to prove myself. But I was very conscious of the fact that even though I didn't need to prove myself, that I was still battling myself in giving myself permission to do things. There was nobody that, like, I'm the one that's saying what goes. There's no network that's expecting some idea. There's no executive that's expecting an idea. There's nobody, like, it's not like I was dying, like, and no offense to Sundance, I wasn't like, we got to make the Sundance deadline and we've got to like be in this festival or whatever. There was just nothing. It was just like purely like, I want to make a movie that I would love to see. And they say, some people say, oh, this movie was for me. Sure, partly, but if it was really for me, I'd pick a way less expensive art form. I do not spend that much money on myself, as you can tell. I mean, this is like, I think I stole this from a boyfriend and this was given to me. So anyway, but I was very aware of certain moments where my brain was like, I guess this was part of the exercise of exploring, was confronting myself and confronting my own mortality and talking about it with other, my collaborators, which is like being very aware of, I'd be like, well, you can't do that because it doesn't make any sense. And I'd be like, why can you not do that? Like, it was this weird sort of inner critic still popping up, even though I could do whatever I wanted. And it became like, even as much as like, because I have so many friends that, like a lot of my friends that are like, you just don't seem like you give a fuck. And I'm like, I don't think I do, but I do. Like I realized through this process where it's like, oh, it's really hard to not have an inner critic. Like even when there's no reason to have it. Like I'm not trying to prove anything. I can make if it was a complete piece of shit movie, I wouldn't put it out. You know what I mean? Like that, oh well, you know, or if it was an experimental movie, I'd put it in museums, or I you know, there was no basically I built a world where there was no way to fail and I still had an inner critic in me.
No, that all makes sense. And thank you so much for talking so in depth about your process in making this film. It's such a fantastic accomplishment. And for anyone who is watching this Q&A who hasn't yet watched the film, it's currently out via Neon. And I hope that everybody will take the time to rent it and watch it and support independent cinema. And thank you so much, Amy.
Of course. Yes. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.